Hello, friends. Thanks for joining me in my series, Leadership Potholes and How to Avoid Them. Today, the topic is the untrained leader, and perhaps we could also call it the undertrained leader, or the poorly trained leader, or the wrongly trained leader, perhaps even the overly trained leader. Do you know that it's possible to be overly trained, particularly if we don't put into action the things we've learned? I heard a funny story recently that kind of illustrates this important subject of being trained and learning things. There was a flight attendant, and his job one day was to clean out the airplane after the flight was over. And so he went all the way through the plane and cleaned out the trash and different things. And he finally gets to the pilot's cockpit, and he happens to notice a book there. It says Beginner's Guide to Flying an Airplane, Volume 1. And he said, wow, I've always wanted to fly an airplane, and this flight attendant stuff just doesn't get it for me. And wouldn't that be awesome to actually fly the plane? So he opens the book up, and he sees in the first chapter, it says to start the engine, push the red button. So he pushes the red button, and sure enough, the engine starts. He is so excited. Wow. And he quickly turns to the next chapter where he read, to taxi down the runway, press the blue button. So sure enough, he presses the blue button and the plane begins to move, and it starts moving down the runway. Amazing. Well, that was all really nice, but Fred wanted to fly. That's why he, was going through this sort of thing. And so he turns to the third chapter, and sure enough, in big, bold print, it says, to get the airplane into the air, please press the green button. So Fred follows the instructions and was thrilled when the plane began to fly. So for 20 minutes, he enjoyed just flying around and acting like he was a pilot. That was so awesome. And then after 20 minutes, he said, oh, that's awesome, great adventure, I'm ready to land now. So he opens the book up, he goes to the fourth chapter, and he wants to see how to land the plane. And here's what it said, in great big bold letters once again, it says, to know how to land an airplane, please purchase Volume 2 on Amazon or at your nearest bookstore. Well, what are some lessons from this story? Fred did a good job in the first few chapters of his training, but he didn't know how to land the plane. So incomplete education is dangerous. If you only learn how to fly a plane, but you don't learn how to land it, you're going to have trouble. Well, the second thing is Fred probably should have stayed in his own lane. He was good at cleaning the planes. He probably should have done that, but instead he wanted to get in someone else's lane. He wanted to get in the pilot's lane, and he wanted to fly the plane. This thing about staying in your own lane, that is a really important issue these days. And I like to swim at the YMCA close by to where I live, and you go down through the lanes, and one day I was doing the side stroke, so you're kind of like this, and you're kind of kicking your feet, and I got too close to the part over the rope there, and I kicked this old lady that was leaning against the rope, and she was in the aerobics class. And I thought, oh my, this is terrible. Well, fortunately, she wasn't injured or anything, but it was a real lesson in stay in my own lane. I was having a good time swimming, but I veered into someone else's lane, and that's a dangerous thing. Well, in my career, I've had a number of different jobs, and often I had to learn this whole principle of what is my lane. If you're going to stay in your lane, you got to know what your lane is, and that's a lot of people really don't know that. What is their lane? What is your purpose in life? What has God called you to do? That's so important. Well, in this one job I had a great boss. His name was Dave, and every month we had a monthly meeting, and he would take the computer screen and he'd turn it around, and he'd show me Excel spreadsheets about how financially we had done the previous month. He was so excited about it. Dave loved spreadsheets. He loved the finances. He loved to analyze it. How are we doing? How's our trajectory? Me, on the other hand, my eyes would just kind of gloss over. I could never figure that stuff out. I'm not a numbers guy. I'm a letters guy, a words guy, but not a numbers guy. And so it was not my lane. He tried to train me. He tried month after month. He'd show me the spreadsheet and here's how we're doing and look at this line and look at that line. And I'd kind of nod my head and act like I knew what I was seeing, but I really didn't know. I really could never figure it out. That was not my lane. And he could try as he wanted, train me as best he could. It was not going to really be my lane. And then at another point in time, Dave wanted to make me a manager. And he said, we'll give you $5,000 more and you'll manage a whole bunch of people. And I thought, wow, for $5,000, you'd have to pay me a whole lot more to be a manager, because managers have a lot of headaches, you know. Well, at one point I did become a manager for a short period of time, but frankly, again, it wasn't really my lane. I did okay. I tried my best, but I'm a visionary, I'm a content creator, and being a manager was never really my best pursuit in life. So what is your lane? What kind of training do you need to get to the next stage of your lane, of what God has for your life, and what your career, your family, your relationships, your ministry? What is your lane, and what kind of training do you need to fulfill the purpose you're created for? Well, if we're going to figure out what our training is, we have to figure out what our objective is. If you don't know your objective, if you don't know your focus, if you don't know your calling, you're never going to be able to know what kind of training you need to get there. So we need to know our objective. We need to know our intended destination. And I encourage you to go back and look at my video on the unfocused leader, because it's all about that. And some people have never-ending training. They go to every conference, every seminar, they read every book. I had a friend named Annabelle. That's not her real name. Don't want to discredit the person whose real name it is. And she every year would go to several conferences, go to seminars, to take courses. She spent thousands of dollars and countless hours trying to get better at all sorts of things. The problem is she never really followed up on it. She never really made any money. All these seminars and conferences and courses were designed to spend money to make money, but she really never made any money, and her courses had very little fruit. Well, that's sad, because she didn't know what her objective was. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't really have a clear path, and so she just was floundering with all kind of different courses and all kind of training that turned out to not really be very productive at all. And then many of you have already gone to college. You've already figured out that, but I want to just talk for a few minutes about how does college and formal education fit into this thing. A lot of young people these days are figuring out maybe it's better to go to a trade school. Less debt, you don't get into all those student loans. Some people are more adapted to trades, working with their hands, plumbing, electrical, different things, construction. So for some people, that's what they ought to do. But let me tell you about my own college journey. My parents always instilled in me, hey, you got to go to college. You know, only deadbeat people don't go to college. You got to go to college so you'll have a good life. So I went to college, and I really didn't know what I was there for. Didn't really know what I wanted to do afterwards. So I became a history major. Why? Well, I liked history. I liked the history classes. The history classes were interesting to me. But eventually I realized that it was a dead end. There's no way to get a job as a history major. You have to go and get another degree, some other kind of degree, because you can't get a degree just being a history major. You can't get a job being a history major. So after 4 years at a pretty expensive college in Ohio, I went to law school and spent 3 years in law school. And so eventually I got out of law school. I did well there. And the interesting part about that was, even after law school, so 7 years of academic training, I really found I wasn't really ready to really enter the real world of a career yet. Now, fortunately, my dad was an attorney, and so he mentored me. He helped me to learn the practical side. I'd learned all the book learning. Had contracts law and constitutional law and tort law, all this kind of law. But I didn't really know how to apply it until I was mentored. And so some of you need a mentor, and that's a very, very important thing. Hey, I was really blessed that my parents were fairly wealthy and they paid for most of my college education, but many people are so deeply in debt by the time they're done that they can't buy a house. It's hard to get married. It's hard to buy a car. I mean, they're so in debt that it just really hamstrings them for many, many, many years to come. Well, how does this all apply to you? I want to also mention that, there's a lot of famous people, some of the biggest names in the last 40, 50 years, some of the most famous world-changing people that never got a college degree. Isn't that something? Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, never got a college degree. Bill Gates, Microsoft, one of the richest men in the world, never got a college degree. And Rush Limbaugh, conservative commentator, who died a few years ago, never got a college degree. So what's the purpose of that? What's the point of that? Well, some things you need a degree for, some things you don't. These guys were very smart. They also did a lot of learning on their own. They also got some mentors and they learned from other people. But for some careers, you need a certification. You need a degree. You can't practice law without a law license unless you've probably seen the famous TV series Suits, where Mike Ross was a real smart guy, claimed that he went to Harvard Law School, but really never did. And he, with the mentorship of Harvey Specter, became a great, amazing lawyer, so to speak, even though he wasn't really a law school graduate. So that's a rare deal, though, right? So sometimes I think I could be a good doctor. I could give out ideas and nutritional advice and things like that. Maybe I just need to get a lab coat, get a stethoscope. Maybe I could do that. But no, you can't be a doctor, really, unless you have a degree, unless you're licensed. And I saw a statement recently by American science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke, and he was asked to define intellectuals. And he said intellectuals are people who are educated beyond their intelligence. That really stuck in my mind. How could you be educated beyond your intelligence? Well, what he meant is that there's many people who they have a lot of formal education, but they lack practical intelligence and wisdom. They don't know how to apply all this training. And the book of Proverbs is a profound part of the Bible where Solomon says over and over again, get wisdom, get understanding. In other words, it's not just book learning, it's not just degrees, it's like, do you have wisdom and what to do with the knowledge that you have? A lot of people have knowledge that's not really paying off because they don't have the wisdom of what to do with that. And just think about it. I've evaluated some people's resume over the years. Either they applied for jobs or I wrote my own resume at various times. And I think, what are the employers really looking for? Well, they might be looking for college degrees and credentials and things like that, but often they're looking for success and productivity. And whether it's in sales or marketing or some other kind of thing, they're looking for somebody that's actually accomplished something, a track record, in other words. And one of the things that's so important, as I've interviewed different people for jobs, it's people skills. It's people skills. And that is such a huge part of success in life. There's books on this subject, like How to Win Friends and Influence People and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And a lot of it's about people skills, having an emotional intelligence, not just an IQ. So that's so important. I've had a number of friends that have gotten online college degrees. And you think, well, that's not going to get you very far, online college degrees. And they wondered, they said, if we get an online degree, are we going to be able to be successful in life, successful in our careers? Well, the interesting thing is they are very successful. But the reason is not because of the superiority of their online degrees, but because they had people skills. People wanted to be like them. People wanted to listen to them. They were good in engaging people, and that was how it worked. So it's not just about your degree. It's about what can you do, what are your actual skills, and what are your people skills. So important. I had a young friend named BJ, and he got a 4-year degree because his parents told him, you got to get a 4-year degree. He got a degree in communications at a pretty prestigious college, and he went into the job market after that, and the best he could find was, it's kind of a call center selling things, and he did really well. He made $83,000 the first year. He did great. But the interesting thing that shocked BJ, is that right next to him, to the right and left in this call center, were some people who had no college degree at all. They just graduated from high school. And he said, whoa, I could have had the same job 4 years earlier without the $30,000 or so of student debt that I accumulated. I could have done it. Now, I think BJ is glad he got a college degree, and probably later in his career, having those degrees on his resume probably helped. But the point of it is, whatever degree you get, whatever course, whatever training, whatever you do, it should be targeted to what you're really trying to do. There's a famous author, Robert Kiyosaki. He wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad. You've probably seen that book. But in 2013, he wrote one that really intrigues me. It's Why A Students Work for C Students. And his premise in the book is that C students have these people skills, and they've learned how to really navigate life. The A students, all they have is academic grades and everything like that, but they really don't do so well in the real world sometimes. I had a friend in law school, really wasn't exactly a friend. I don't think he had any friends. I was as much of a friend as he had. His name was Gary Udelson. I've changed his name a little bit so it won't embarrass him. But he was an extreme introvert, had terrible people skills. He would be the first one in the law library at the beginning of the day, and he'd leave at the end of the day. They had to kick him out. But he couldn't carry on a conversation, couldn't talk to people, couldn't engage, wasn't interested in anything other than just spouting off the law. Now, he got excellent grades because of that, but he was totally unsuited for success as an actual attorney. I don't know what ever happened to Gary. I would be curious to find out. Maybe he should have tried a different career, because sometimes we're trained in something that we're really not suited for. And I don't know if Gary was really suited to be a successful lawyer, because most lawyers have to engage with people. Wow. Another kind of related thing is we have to be aware of in this training thing is to beware of head knowledge that never becomes actual experience. Picture somebody that goes to medical school and reads lots and lots of books about how to be a surgeon. Here's what you do, here's what you do, here's what you do. And yet he's never done any operations. He's never had any actual experience. So that would be really scary, wouldn't it? That would be tough. But there's a lot of people in life these days, they've got all their training from YouTube videos. I love YouTube videos, by the way. Do it yourself YouTube videos. It's pretty great stuff. But for surgeons or rocket science or different things like that, you got to have something more than a YouTube video. You need on-the-job training. You need real experience in what you're being trained for. My law school was right next to a seminary, it turned out, at Capital University. And it fascinated me because I met a number of the guys that were in seminary and ladies in the seminary, and they were, good people, sincere people. But the interesting thing that most of them had never done any actual ministry. They hadn't led anybody to Christ. They hadn't discipled anybody. They hadn't really done much teaching or preaching, but they were just taking courses in academics and hermeneutics and homiletics and all this great stuff. And I just thought, wow, that is not the kind of training that most people need. We need some of that, sure, but then we need on-the-job training. And I think of how Jesus trained his disciples. He would talk to them, train them, discuss things with them, ask them questions, but then he sent them out to actually heal the sick and raise the dead and cast out demons and do teaching and relate to people. And you know what? In Luke chapter 9, I'd encourage you to read it sometime. His disciples messed up a lot. They really messed up. They were embarrassingly messed up. But what did he do in the next chapter, Luke chapter 10? He sent them out again. So in other words, it's not about perfection, but you're never going to get better unless you actually do some stuff, unless you have on-the-job training, unless you actually put your knowledge into practice. I really appreciate the story of the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul, before his conversion, he was mentored by Gamaliel, a famous rabbi. And so he had personal mentoring. That was important. Apprenticeship, that's a very important part of our training too. But in his case, his life didn't really change until he had this conversion experience on the Damascus Road where Jesus, the risen Jesus, appeared to him and said, "Why do you persecute me, Saul?" And Saul was transformed. But even after that, he had people in his life who helped him to grow, helped him to mature, helped him to sort this thing out about the Christian life. And that was really, really, really important. So I encourage you about that as well. You might need a mentor, but you also need the Holy Spirit. Paul, the Apostle Paul, the great Apostle Paul, he had all this knowledge of the Old Testament scriptures and all this information he got from his mentor. But in the end, he had to be filled with the Spirit. He had to have a personal relationship with Christ. And you need that too, particularly if you're going to be in some kind of ministry. Well, I want to wrap this up with a couple points, a couple questions. So what can we say then about this pothole of being an untrained leader? Well, a couple things. Education that is not aligned with your objective is not going to work. So figure out your objective and then figure out what kind of training you need. Education without people skills is not going to work. So you need to learn how to get along with people. There's some people that have bounced from job to job and job to job because everywhere they go, they cause problems. They can't relate to people. They can't be a team player. Get some people skills. That's so important. Education without real life experience. Okay, get some academics, get some training like that. Fine, that's great. But then get some real world experience. I love Ezra chapter 7:10, quoted all the time. Ezra set his heart to study the law of the Lord and then to do it and then to teach it. So whatever we learn, it's important to put it into practice, to do it. And then lastly, on this part, education without wisdom. Make sure that you have God's wisdom in how to apply all the learning that you have. So here's some questions. Is your training based on clearly defined objectives? Otherwise, you'll just drift like a sailboat that has no rudder or have the sails just kind of dangling out there. It's not going to work. Do you need additional training in order to advance your career or advance your ministry, advance where you're trying to get as a husband or a father or a mother? Do you need additional training? Most of us need additional training in some kind of way. And then lastly, on the questions, do you need some kind of mentoring? Somebody to help, somebody who's already been down the road before, somebody who's had the same career, the same ministry, the same thing. Do you need mentoring so that you can grow and have your skills refined? That is so important. Well, lastly, I want to share the one principle about discipleship that you could glean from the Bible. I call it the FAT principle, F-A-T. Faithful, available, and teachable. That's the way we should be. And today I want to focus on the last thing, teachable. Are you teachable? I had a dog, a beloved dog named Charlie, big black dog, part lab, part collie, I don't know, just basically kind of a mutt. He was a wonderful dog, but he had some bad habits that he learned early in his life. And he would chase UPS trucks and the postman and any truck and any car that he could find, and it was a mess. He had learned it from some neighboring dogs, and it was bad. Well, we said, we're going to train Charlie. we're going to get an invisible fence. We got an invisible fence, and some trainer comes and tries to train Charlie in staying in his invisible fence. Well, it's a great idea. The problem was Charlie was not very teachable. Now, he would stay in the invisible fence sometimes, but when he saw one of those UPS trucks or FedEx trucks, he would take off and he would bust out of that invisible fence. He just wasn't very teachable. So my last question to you today is, are you teachable? Do you want to keep learning, keep growing, no matter how much you've learned, no matter how much you've succeeded? Are you on the path to always learning and growing and refining who God wants you to be? Well, I'm praying for you today. God bless you, and I look forward to seeing you in our next session.